can share your screen. Um, Let me drop a few things. Here's what I'd like. So today we're going to talk about preparing for transfer, obviously, because I keep saying it over and over, but like also don't want to forget our best practices. Let me get that onto the chat, which I lost my paste. Um, and also I'm going to stop the music. Sorry. So I'm gonna get a few things. I'm not gonna start my own slide deck, but I do want to share with you some session objectives that are helpful because later on I'm gonna do a little survey with you guys to see how satisfied you are. That's how we're doing evaluations now. So like as we finish up our session, as we ask questions, I'm going to throw that up on the screen and I want you to recall and go back be able to go back and see these objectives and refer to them. Thanks, John. John's dropped his slide deck. I'm also going to link it in our agenda for the day, which is the link I dropped in, so you can have it there. What else do I want to say? Please also display your full name and organization. That helps us so much with attendance. So please do that. I also want to let everyone know it's going to be a small group today. I've 30 people registered, but as you know, not everybody's gonna come. So maybe we'll have like a dozen people, but it's gonna be intimate and super wonderful. So I'll be linking John's slide deck for you guys. And then I'm also just going to quickly turn it over to John and Courtney Camacho from Kaplan Education. Last word, Foundation. Last word fell out of my head. Welcome so much, guys. Also, I have a bunch of people telling me to tell you hi, so I'm going to just say it real quick. Emily says hi, Emily Task, and Adela Effendi says hi too. These are well-loved and old friends of mine as well. So I leave you in amazing hands.
And quick question, Sandy, should
Yes,
we
sir.
share on our end the slide
You
deck?
can you
Oh
Oh
no,
no,
Sandy, I think you're frozen.
we lost you for a moment.
Glenda, you're muted. I see
I
you.
can let you share on my end.
Yeah. I think
Okay,
I've adjusted it so oh, you made them host. Okay, great.
so you should be
awesome.
able to share. Does that answer your question, John?
You cut off, so we didn't hear
I'm
anything, but
sorry.
it's okay.
It's
But yes,
okay.
I can share. Okay, perfect. So let me set that up. Actually, really quick, I kind of need to move my slide deck to the beginning, right, in order to share appropriately. Can you see our presentation there? Awesome. And I can kick us off, Courtney. So, thank you all everyone for being here. Before we jump into our discussion for today, just some quick introductions. My name is Jonathan Chavez. I go by John. I always feel like I'm in trouble when I get my full name. Um, but I am the Director of Academic Advisement with the Kaplan Educational Foundation. I am also an alumni of the program back in cohort 4. I won't tell you what years that was, but we're now at cohort 18 and really excited to be with you all and happy to share some space with Courtney. So I'll give her space to introduce herself.
John, John. um, Good morning, everyone. I'm Courtney Camacho, also with Kaplan Educational Foundation. Happy to be here with you all talking about college transfer, which is what we do, and happy to be in community with everybody. I'll share. Oh, also at Kaplan, I am the program coordinator for our newest program called Community College Bridge, which is an early intervention to college transfer. So we will be sharing a little bit of information about that as well before we end today's call.
Awesome. And so we're here today to talk about the world of transfer. And so we'll be covering a couple of different areas. We're going to start off with the problem. What is the problem? And also, like, what's possible to help solve it? We're gonna talk about what makes transfer complex and what intentional transfer entails, um, where to find help along the way, what you all can do, and sharing Sandy things for your icebreaker around best practices, so we can share some best practices. We'll be sharing some additional resources with you all, and then we'll also be discussing, to Courtney's earlier point, about our new program, the Community College Bridge program. And so, not sure if you all are aware of this statistic, but um, probably are if you've been in this space. You know, when it comes to college transfer, so 80% of community college students want to earn their bachelor's degree. How many are able to make that next step and continue on to their bachelor? Only about 31% are typically successfully transfer, and a small 14% actually earn their bachelor's degrees. And those are daunting statistics. I'm sure you all have faced some version of this statistic in your journey, but you know, we firmly believe that with the right supports and resources, that students um, can find success. And partially because over our 18 cohorts, we've been able to challenge those statistics with our programming. Um, you know, 96% of our scholars that have entered our program have been able to earn their associate's degree and transfer to a four-year institution, and 92% of the students that have completed our program go on to earn their bachelor's degree. Starkly different from the statistic we just saw. And so, to that point, you know, if you see our demographics, our students, our scholars range across various ages. A large portion are first generation, many low income students, you know, so they range a variety of different life experiences. And for us, it's developed our belief that anyone can find success with the right supports and preparation. And so, before we begin actually talking about the core issues and what we can do about it, you know, I do want to share a little bit about what the Kaplan Educational Foundation is and who we are and what we do. We're a 501c3 public charity that was initially established um, with the support of a generous endowment funded by Kaplan Inc. executives back in 2006. Oh my gosh, so many years ago at this point. They launched the Kaplan Leadership Program with a goal of supporting high achieving, under-resourced, underrepresented community college students, and they wanted to help a small portion of people in a very big way. They wanted to provide a highly comprehensive program that would provide financial aid, academic support, leadership, skill development, cultural enrichment, and career preparation. Um, to our most overlooked student populations. And as many of you may have worked with students that go into community college, you may have found that once you enter community college, it's kind of like you're figuring it all out on your own, you know. And so, having noticed that, they really wanted to create a program that can help make a difference. Our program may feel very unique. We are one of a very few programs that actually work with community college students directly and explicitly. And um, and our model is really intending to trailblaze a model that can support community college students and supporting them specifically to attend highly competitive four-year schools. For us, transfer admissions process is a larger opportunity, right, to support our scholars in life and their professional lives in general in the professional world. Um, because a lot of the things that you're doing when you're applying to college are things that you're gonna do in other aspects of your life too. right? So when you're organizing your admissions process and how you're going to approach it and how you're going to tackle it to successfully transfer, when you're evaluating different financial aid packages and trying to gain an understanding of what's being offered to you and what is a comparable good financial aid package, and or budgeting for residential campus life, right? And going away and kind of figuring out how I'm going to make my income work as as a college student. If you're, when you're strategizing your academic and professional aspirations for your career in the future, um, and or seeking out generally opportunities to kind of gauge gain exposure to various career options and or new cultural experiences, new social experiences. All of these things are hopefully we'll be doing even after you graduate from college as well. And so, by learning these skills throughout their transfer process, we encourage them and try to explicitly reinforce that these are skills that they're gonna carry with them forward, and that it's gonna teach them transferable skills that they'll be able to apply to all aspects of their life, to promote their success professionally and personally as well. Um, because we know like what the unexpected complications that life brings, right? And so likewise, right, when we're thinking about transfer specifically, this also brings unexpected complications. So that's why we're here today. And so before we get started, if you can take a moment and, scan our QR code, we'd love to hear a little bit from you of what you're expecting for today.
I also just put the link to the poll in the chat. So if folks are just like strictly on a computer right now and don't want to utilize their phone, you can also just click on the link and you should be able to access it as well.
And I am so tempted to click this link myself, and I'm worried it's gonna jump into into the screen. But let me try it and bring it to the other side. It sure did. Alrighty.
We see your calendar, John.
Oh, perfect. That is, of
I don't
course,
feel
it
so bad
threw.
about mine right now after
I was
that.
wondering. I was wondering why my Oh my goodness. Yes. Sorry. I was wondering why my notes disappeared all of a sudden. That makes a lot of sense. Appreciate the heads up. Take another moment or two.
John, I'm just gonna, as folks are doing this, I'm going to share my screen so you could see the results of what everyone's putting in.
Thanks.
Okay, I think there's if I remember when we last checked, there was about 11 folks on. So if folks are still finishing up, please. You can also add in more than one response, but looking to just see And if you have already entered in what you hope to learn about college transfer, please just take a moment to see what some of our colleagues have mentioned. And then we'll get started.
Hmm.
Anybody noticing some themes coming up? Also, apologies if you can hear the ambulance driving past my window.
Isn't that just the way? Just like I think a lot of people are talking about the idea of just like seamless, like which suggests there are a lot of seams, a lot of like problems that come up. So like that's the theme for me of transfer in
Mhm.
general. So it's interesting to see that we're all sort of thinking that too.
Absolutely.
Anything else coming for folks? Anything else coming up as like a theme or? I totally agree with Sandy. There's lots of seams, lots of cracks that folks can fall through. Yeah, I think these are great. And I think John and I already are prepping. We were anticipating that these would be some of the things that would come up in this section. So I think I'm really confident, more confident than I was before, that we have all the things in our presentation for today. John, anything else you want to add before I stop sharing screen?
No, yeah, I think that was a perfect segue. Well, to that piece, it's definitely a lot of themes. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Um, let's start there. And so, um, our goal for today's conversation is really going to be around intentional transfer, but we can't talk about intentional transfer without talking about transfer in a more general sense, right? And I think one of the things that like one of the first themes is that transfer is not one thing, right? We see a mix of different kinds of experiences. Students going from 2 years to 4 year schools. We see students going from 4 years to other 4 year schools. Students going from 4 year schools, taking a break, coming back to 2 year schools, even students going from trade schools or technical institutes, things of that sort, to then transfer on to other degree seeking programs. There's a lot of experience that plays into what a transfer experience looks like. And in many situations, what prompted transfer is unintentional, right? It's not usually an intentional process. Um, think of all the transitions that students have to experience in their first semester. For some, they're, going to a new location, sometimes drastically different than New York City, right? And I don't know about y'all, but even speaking on my own experience, it was my first time really having to leave New York City. More or less, I'm seeing deer and bears and things on my campus and like foliage, right? And many of our students may be experiencing a similar change in their environments. Um, we're experiencing expenses that we've never had to budget before, right? This is for many students the first time that they've had to take out a loan, right? A student loan, things of that sort. This may be the first time that they have to kind of like plan for how they're gonna pay for food outside of their meal plans, things of that sort. Paying for textbooks, right? They may have been getting support in their community college, and now they may no longer be receiving those supports, etc. Um, and sometimes drastically different student bodies, right? Socially, economically, racially, even, you know, the we have different academic challenges, right? Expectations sometimes less hand holding than they might have experienced or been used to in their high school experience. Um, and so I don't know about y'all, but I think even for myself, like I get flustered with small change, even. And when I think of like everything that they're experiencing in this first semester, like it's no wonder to me that some students have a hard time kind of figuring it all out, right? Even more so if they didn't plan adequately for this dramatic change. And most of our students aren't anticipating how big of a change this is until they get into that first semester, right? So, um, not every situation is always necessarily going to be solved by transferring, right? But because like transferring might add additional complications and challenges that they might have not anticipated, right? We said like it's not exactly a seamless process, right? But when transfer is the next logical next step, right? That we want to also help students learn from these experiences that they may have already gotten in college to plan more intentionally um, for their transfer process and minimize the issues that may occur in their next transition, right? So thinking about just as transfer as a whole is sometimes also just helpful and kind of thinking about, okay, what are you probably going to anticipate when you make this new transition? I saw in some of our poll there, right, of like especially if you're looking at non CUNY, non SUNY institutions, right? Like those transitions may feel a lot different as well, even within SUNY and their CUNY at times. So, we're gonna focus mainly on intentional transferring and like what do we mean by that, right? The 2 year to 4 year transition. So you've completed your associates and or you may have also transferred earlier without your associates, but you're then going to the next step to completing your bachelor's program. And so we want to keep these things in mind to kind of true help our students prepare to truly understand their motivations, right? But then also for them to be able to like optimize resources and successfully transfer and succeed in their next college experience as well. Okay. Um, this is not, we don't need to go too deep into it, but just so that you know, there's also, so like what we're describing in this slide here, like there's the way that we would define these might be a reverse transfer experience, a 4 year to 2 year um, transfer. There's different reasons that that may occur, but that might be considered a reverse transfer. There are lateral transfers that you might have experienced from students going from one community college to another community college, or maybe going from one 4 year school to another 4 year school. And then there's the intentional transfer that we just described, going from 2 year to 4 year. Um, and yeah, let me go into our next piece. And so, um, transfer requires you to reapply to schools, right? And in a lot of ways, you would think that that would make it pretty much the same that you have done before, but in fact, it's not, right? So like, there's other terms that may come up. The language of transfer looks a lot different than the regular college admissions process, and so helping students understand the language of transfer will also help them reduce the surprises that they'll face, right? Because they'll have an idea of kind of um, what they'll need to know, understand and what to expect when they're starting to apply for transferring. Um, if a student learns about articulation agreements, I saw that in our poll here, we already talked a little bit about articulation agreements. If they know about that, right, or even more so, how many of us know about joint programs, right, which is another version of articulation agreements that can help streamline the transfer process a little bit more specifically. As an example, just so you know, joint programs might be like the Criminal Justice Academy that you might know of for John Jay, right? That's a very popular one. And so you're basically dual enrolled. You won't have to necessarily go through applying to college again to then transfer from your community college into John Jay. Um, Understanding that what transfer friendly means and understanding that there is a such thing as transfer friendliness institutions, right? Not all schools, their experiences for first years are going to look like their experiences for second for transfers, right? They may not accept all your credits, so we'll talk a little bit about that. They may approach financial aid differently, right? Scholarships and aid that might be 100% need met for first year students isn't necessarily the case for transfer students all the time. There's a lot of things that may look different, and so understanding how to look for transfer-friendly schools, again, might help students kind of minimize the challenges that it may face once they get into their next college. Um, and then other things that come up, right? So we talk about with credits, on the, students may not realize that they can even ask for a transfer credit evaluation. Um, and what that would do is assess which of your credits are coming in and being transferred, which credits are going to be rejected, so you can have an idea of how much time you're going to have left at your next school. Um, or things like residency requirement. We have so many students that come through our program that are excited about going to their 4-year school, and they're gonna go study abroad, or they're gonna go do utilize something like a consortium if there's a grouping or a cluster of colleges to go to different schools, and they might not be aware of residency requirements. If you're not aware of what that is that you need to take a certain portion amount of schooling at your specific institution, right? And so that may that may hinder your ability to be able to study abroad and or take classes somewhere else. And so like having those clear senses of understandings and having some tools to help, can help them plan early and reduce the risk of not meeting their goals when they're getting ready for transferring. Um, some other things that pop up that you should just be aware of is that you may pursue a major, and in trying to transfer your major to your next school, there may be specific requirements that you need to meet. One that's often the case is for business and economics majors. They may need to have taken at least calculus 1 in order to meet the program requirements at many 4-year schools, and their community college might not require them to take that class. So things of that they should be aware of, right? Some majors you may lose credits if you doing photography, but it's a commercial photography class like they have at LaGuardia, and then you're trying to do a photography BFA. A lot of those credits may not be accepted, and so just because they're the same major, they should be aware that that's not always going to be the case. And then we talk about articulation agreements and things of that sort. Mentioned about scholarships not being uniform um, across different schools, and so being aware of those things. And so one of the things we'll talk about in a moment is that like there's offices and things that can help, and that can help them navigate these kinds of complications on their college campuses that they can utilize. So we'll talk about that, and and in preparation for that, you can help them anticipate what's to come and what to ask for, so that they can really take advantage of those resources at their community colleges, and so they're not solely leaning on you for all of their guidance. And so, how can you all help prep students? Um, there are tons of resources, right? And I know some of these may feel more familiar and or you know, uh, you may have seen across places, right? ASAP, College Discovery, right? Some of these may be less familiar. So the Transfer Success Network partners with a number of community colleges within CUNY, and they work specifically to support students, high achieving students with applying to 4-year colleges. There's involvement opportunities through CUNY Service Corps, C-STEP, um, each one reach one, which is at BMCC UMLA, and these different forms of campus involvement, they're essential to student success, to college success, and to transfer success, right? Because when you're involved in these kinds of programs, other students are talking about what they're gonna do next, right? There's opportunities to kind of learn about what's possible in those kind of formats. They often have a faculty advisor that they are able to build relationships with over a longer period of time, because oftentimes with your professor, maybe you only take them one time in the semester, and then you never meet with them again, right? So you're able to build longer lasting relationships, and they take interest in you, right? Because they're working with you, they kind of get a sense of what you're looking to do and things of that sort, and you have a better chance of building a stronger connection. Um, in many ways, they're able to offer guidance and suggestions of what students can do next, and open some opportunities that students may not have been aware of. A lot of times we have scholars that will be involved in one of these opportunities, and then be told about another opportunity, and now they're getting involved in different ways on campus, and that came from those different connections that they've built. And professors, right? So many students are going to go to class, and they don't necessarily do anything to connect with the professors in that regard, because they didn't realize that like that's a thing that they could do and or should be doing, right? In the same ways that it's with high school. I mean, the relationship looks and feels a lot different many of the times. And so, having that awareness that they can talk to their professors about their future plans, and that they can get guidance from their professors, is helpful to be able to again build that campus involvement and that exposure. And then also like they're gonna probably need it for recommendation letters, especially if they're applying to these non-CUNY or non-SUNY schools. So there's an abundance of resources that they can be leveraging and people that they can lean on aside from us as their sole counselors to be building out their transfer plans. And so at the core, transferring is just applying to college again, right? But what you call it, there are little nuances, right? The things that we were kind of discussing a second ago, and so having access to these support networks, right? Through professors, advisors, etc., is helpful to kind of anticipate those nuances. But I also want to give you a small gist of things of what those nuances may look like in a typical transfer experience so that you can also anticipate them so that when we're talking about later on how do you support students we can really have a good sense of where we can step in, right? So if it hasn't been said explicitly enough now or hasn't clicked, students should start early, right? The moment they start in community college, they should already be thinking about transferring, and they can start as early just researching and familiarizing themselves with what are potential transfer friendly schools, especially if they're going to be doing a special major, right? Because we mentioned about those requirements. Um, they won't be able to do their financial aid when the time comes until they have a college list. So like having a college list as early as possible is really helpful to help streamline some of those later processes. They'll they'll want to review their applications immediately, right? And like giving them reminders of the different documents that go into an application process is helpful. The Common App, it looks similar in a lot of ways. The one of the differences might be that their personal statement is not going to be required everywhere. If you've done SUNY apps and things of that sort, you'll see or even with CUNY, sometimes some schools will ask you for a personal statement and other schools will not, right? But the other thing is that the personal statement questions, they'll still oftentimes look like your first year questions, but sometimes instead they'll ask you why are you considering transferring, right? And a thing to be aware of is like obviously that can be a one sentence answer, right? Like I need to go finish my bachelor's, um, but they should be thinking about kind of the like what got them to that point. Okay. Um, Fee waivers are still a thing and they're still available, and so there's some links here as well, right? On like how fee waivers will work for CUNY and SUNY. um, they can, if they're a current college student applying without a gap for CUNY, they'll waive the fee there. And so that's just an important thing for you to know. And for SUNY, they'll encourage you to complete your associates in order for you to qualify for a fee waiver as well. We mentioned this earlier, so don't bear repeating, but building relationships with professors, they may need recommendations down the line, and they might not be aware of that. Transfer friendly courses. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but like not all courses are that transfer friendly, right? We were saying about commercial photography, right? It's not gonna, it might be very specific, for instance, and having an understanding of that is kind of important. And so there are tools that students can utilize to kind of do that planning ahead of time. DegreeWorks has a what if um, built in that goes CUNY to CUNY that they can look at to see how their credits may transfer over from one CUNY school to another. There's also T-REX, and if you're not familiar, another great tool that you can look at. It even extends into SUNY, and so the link is there as well. Explore.cuny.edu. Um, as we said earlier, right? Researching articulation agreements and joint programs and credit equivalency, course equivalencies, like understanding how your credits are gonna function is probably like one of the key, like best things for transfer students, so that they have a sense of like how much time they need to commit to finish their bachelor's degree. And one thing that we just do as standard practice is that students should not be committing to schools without knowing how many credits they are, but might not be aware of that. So just a thing to like let them know. They can um they can reach out to colleges to get a sense of the financial aid and how it works for transfer students. The winter session of their second year is like a great time for them to focus on their applications, right? For them to like build out time if they're not in class to just buckle down, get the applications out of the way so that they're not having to do it while they're in classes. and then different things that they may want to do in terms of following up with colleges. Um, One thing that might be some helpful advice is that students that are eligible and join PTK, Phi Theta Kappa, it's the Honor Society for Community College Students. If they join and become a PTK member, they're eligible for additional scholarships, and that can average about 4,000, like $4,500, in additional scholarship aid at tons of schools. Sometimes I've seen upwards of like $12,000. So it's definitely a great thing for students to be aware of in terms of with financial aid and following up to see if they are a PTK member and didn't get the scholarship to see if they're eligible for one. Um, and then encourage students to visit colleges. We were talking about earlier about kind of like some of the reasons students leave, and this might be the experience for some of your students that they've never been to the college campus until the first day of classes. I know that's been the case for many of my students back in the days, and letting them know that doesn't have to be the case, especially if they're applying to school within New York City, right? There's a train right away, and so you know, admitted students days are typically good opportunities for them to be able to get a good experience of what this campus has to offer.
Yeah, so when we talk about college transfer, one of the things that I want to quote our executive director in saying that transfer is a today problem, not a tomorrow problem, and that students really should be thinking about transfer as early as possible. So I know many folks that are on the call are on the access side, for example, and advising high school students. And so there might be a question of like, these, if we're thinking of quote unquote college transfer, that might be like down the road and there's nothing that I can do. And there's actually not, that's not the case, right? Like there are some things that we could be doing even in high school to reinforce that transfer is a pathway for many students that is realistic and feasible for students to do on their way to getting a bachelor's degree. And so how I like to think about transfer is often as a special population, right? We all work for networks and organizations where budgets are not flourishing, right? To where folks have separate transfer offices or separate transfer advisors. We have to be resourceful in that, and we have to layer our transfer advising into the work that we're already doing. And so we thought that we would do this activity today with you all to think about what's the content that you're already sharing with students about college, whether that be college exploration, financial aid, majors and careers, and or special events, right? Those things are already happening on the access side, but how can we layer in some transfer language, some transfer topics into those spaces? And so in a second, we are going to actually pair off into some small breakout rooms for folks to think about and brainstorm it and think about how you can talk to your students about transfer even as they're still in high school. So give me a second. In the meantime, I'll ask John if there's anything else he wants to say in the meantime, but I don't know if that's true. Okay. I'm going to share an example also before we get into our breakout
I'm over
rooms.
here talking, not realizing I was on mute. Sorry about that. Do you want me to go over the example in the meantime?
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so one example might be, we may talk about what to expect in terms of like how academics work in college, right? And how, take like doing well in school matters. Um, but in this example, right, in talking about what SAP is, for instance, we may talk about how SAP has long-term effects even for transfer, right? So this might be a chart or an activity that you share with students about kind of like what are the more longer term ramifications, right? Obviously, we know that failing classes can affect your financial aid. They Students may not even realize that they can go into academic probation if they don't meet satisfactory academic progress requirements. So we're going to talk about that, obviously. Um, but also, some schools won't accept credits that fall under a certain grade, right? And they won't accept them to transfer. So you may lose some of your credits in the process if you were simply getting C's, to be able to pass the class. Um, Obviously, when you're transferring, they're going to want to see competitive GPAs, and so that will be another long-term effect that we can play into our conversations around why SAP, what SAP is and why it matters. Um, then there's also like future financial aid implications, right? Having a stronger GPA and how it can add in, other financial aid opportunities, merit scholarships, and things of that sort. We talked a second ago about PTK being an option, right? And so having a strong GPA can open doors for you to join a program like PTK and have access to additional scholarships as well. So, in the conversation of SAP, there's ways that we can integrate conversations around transfer as well, and better integrate kind of the conversation with transfer with the general SAP conversations. Anything I missed there?
So, no, that's perfect. So even just to reiterate what John was saying, even if you're already talking to students likely about financial aid, and you might even be fine-tuned talking to them about satisfactory academic progress, because that applies to all college-bound students, you might want to get more specific about why SAP is so important for transfer, right? Because there is that midway point to where, to John's point, if there's like credits that aren't following and things like that, there are some long-term financial aid implications. And we all know that almost nobody can afford to attend college out of pocket at this point. And so we are going to go into our breakout rooms. Your breakout rooms are actually labeled. So one group, you'll be in pairs. One group will talk about financial aid. You can think about largely financial aid or, a very specific aspect of it, like SAP, for example. And the other group will be talking about majors and careers. So thinking about the ways that you bring up majors and careers for all students, and then thinking about how that could be layered in with some transfer conversation as well. So we'll give folks about 5 minutes in their rooms, and then we'll come back to chat. Oh. So you saw when I first created it.
Yeah, it pops up the
My
window.
bad.
No. I only showed me when you opened it.
It's all right.
Welcome back, everyone.
Right on time.
Time.
Okay, so folks should, well, go ahead, John, you want to go?
No, please.
Okay, so folks should be back, I think from, I feel like we're still missing some folks, or we might have lost them along the way. Here we go. They're
There you
coming. Here we go. Now we're all back. Okay, so I know folks had some time to talk about how to layer in some transfer advising into their access work, and would love to hear. There were only 2 groups, so whatever group wants to start, please start us off, and then folks feel free to jump in. I also encourage other folks to hit the chat if there's any additional questions or things that you just want to, show love. If people come up with a really great idea, we'd love to show some appreciation for that. So financial aid, just because that was the first thing that came to mind. Anyone from that group open to sharing what are some things that came up?
Okay, so in my group, financial aid, we discuss supporting students who are undocumented to transfer, because usually with the DREAM application, it only covers the 2 years. So how do we support them, and what majors should we encourage them to apply to so that they can transition smoothly, but mostly financially, like how do we support them if they don't have papers after the 2 years, like, and they can't get a scholarship and they really are doing well academically, like that's where I feel like we hit a wall, and then they give up or just go to work. 。
John, I'm going to default to you because I know that you have some great advice for that.
Um, yeah, I wish. No, we do got great advice. And I think to that piece, well, one thing just off the start that I think is worth encouraging students is the Jack and Cook National Transfer Scholarship. If y'all are not aware of this organization, they provide up to $50,000 a year for up to 4 years for students that community college students that are transferring to 4 year schools, regardless of what 4 year school they attend. And so definitely a thing that you know a student in that situation should pursue. Um, Again, if they're a high achieving student, they're doing well, like we were mentioning, like they should be encouraged to also participate with PTK, and those funds are not always restricted, so that may be access to some financial aid that they may not have had access to otherwise. Things of that sort. I want to say there is the Becca scholarship within CUNY, but I'm not sure, unfortunately, post affirmative action, what that is looking like currently. But it's another thing that I'll encourage you to like look into to see if it's still available within CUNY. Um, and then there's also the Dream.us scholarship, which is not the New York State Dream Act scholarship. Um, so those are some other places that you can also look into as potential options.
I would also say, like, there's no doubt that this is a difficult thing to navigate for sure, like financial aid specifically for undocumented students, and then specifically adding on the layer of transfer into that as well. I think that's like just astronomically as we get more layers on there, like more and more difficult to navigate through. So thank you for bringing it up. I think the other thing that comes to mind too, which is not always it's not always available to all students, but in my history with working with this population, I've also really started to get clear on like schools that meet full financial need, and trying to usher undocumented students to those schools, um, particularly because a lot of them operate off of the oh, of course, I'm drawing a blank. What's the other financial aid application on College Board? The one that everyone
Oh, the
hates.
CSS profile.
Yes,
The CSS profile, right? Like it's so invasive, but it is a safe place for folks to put some information in and then potentially get like full financial need met at their institutions. And so that's also an option. It's not as accessible, right? Like you have to have a certain academic profile to apply to some of those institutions, but that is an option for some of those students as well.
I will say to that piece, thank you for saying that, Courtney. Um, Institutional financial aid is not designated based off of status per se. And schools have a lot more liberty on how they distribute that funding. Um, and so if a student is dependent on like federal and state aid, then that status will have a lot more impact, right? Because they wouldn't be eligible for certain levels of funding. And so to Courtney's point, like private institutions may be actually become more accessible. And I think it's worth mentioning to that piece that many community college students don't think it's realistic to apply to on high end, like a high achieving school, like an Ivy League school, like a Princeton or something of that sort. And that's part of the reason with our Kaplan leadership program that we encourage students to even like understand like those are potentially options. As Courtney mentioned, there is a lot of also really um, great liberal arts colleges that sometimes are lesser known and provide substantial funding. It's not uniform in the sense that like sometimes undocumented students will be reviewed as an international student would, so it's reviewed in a different way at times, but it really depends on the schools in terms of how they view applications, transfer applications, as well as applications for undocumented students. So it'd be something that they want to do research on. But we found some schools like Claremont McKenna College has been very helpful to work with in students with special statuses. Um, so just as another like recommendation of a place to look.
And I just want to like echo one thing and then to ask another thing. I felt like I heard you say, Patricia, that New York State Dream Act TAP was only for the first 2 years, but it's not. It's for the whole time that students, as long as they keep up their SAP and all the other like alphabet soups that we're not going to get into today of TAP, students can continue to get TAP for all the for the 4 years, right? And also they can apply for Excelsior if they're on track and things like that through the Dream Act as well. Number one, and then to echo what Courtney and John said about support programs, right? Like all of the CUNYs have Dreamers offices and tons of supports for our students that are undocumented. So that's another thing that I would connect them to, as well as like they mentioned ASAP, which transfers into ACE, and that it does have some financial supports that are like associated with it. So things like that are just, don't forget that for our dreamers.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because it reiterates the importance of like knowing the different campus offices, right, and getting familiar with the opportunities that are on your campuses.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you all. Let's hear from our other group.
I can share for our group since I know that Aladini has to be on site and can't really come off mute or be on video. So she supports this very population that we're talking about. So she was saying that she has a lot of these kind of transfer conversations, and students who did a lot of research ahead of time were very intentional in what they were looking for and then decided to transfer tended to be more successful. So we were kind of talking about, well, what are the conditions that are in place for students that are successful with transfer versus those who aren't? She was saying students transfer for a lot of different reasons. So her advising is really around getting to the heart of why it is that they want to transfer. What are they looking for? What are they missing? What are they hoping to get? Some students just have life situations that become complicated and then may not be as successful once they transfer. But those that are generally the ones that went into it with a lot more intention, a lot more thought, and a lot more research. So that was kind of the heart of what we were getting at in that conversation.
I love that, and I you know would share some additional resources in a moment, right? But like to that piece of like what the research is and things, or of being intentional and doing research and things, you know, part of the conversations that may be helpful is like streamlining or thinking about ways that you can prompt your community college students of like what to expect next, right? Thinking about, we talk about the college admissions timeline for high school students when they're applying to college the first time, maybe integrating also what does a transfer timeline may look like, or what does that look like if you're going to be transferring later down the road, right? We were talking about what financial aid and things that sort, what opportunities are, what are the things you should look for, questions to ask at financial aid offices when you're getting ready for that process and things. So with that's great segue to the. Should I move forward to kind of show some of these resources? Awesome. So as mentioned, like one of those things, and a lot of these resources that like when you're having these conversations around things like timelines and stuff, it can be as simple as creating one pagers or like visuals that they can also take with them and hold on to or save for future use when they're getting ready for that part of their journey. And so the transfer timeline looks different than your high school timeline, right? Which might be more formulated to that very specific senior year. Um, this is gonna be dependent because also like once you start college, you may have some students that are going part time. You may have students that have had to go on academic probation. They weren't successful their first semester for a semester, things of that sort. So it may look a little bit different in terms of phases. And we've gotten this helpful guide also from Khan Academy. So there are things already out there. You don't have to create them yourself, right? Um, to help us kind of think of like what the college timeline looks like a little differently. May go based off of the amount of credits you've accumulated over time, right? Then you can also break that down into the months, like we have up there, of like what to expect for the year that you're actually gonna go begin transferring. This is not uniform. Keep in mind that some students are also like applying for spring admissions, so this might be brought back a few months if they're planning to transfer for the spring semester. Any things you want to add to this resource, Courtney?
Just get started as soon as possible. But other than that, no.
Love that. Yeah, and starting can be, exploring what's out there. Another thing, we talk about majors all the time with students, right? Like what are potential majors, and like how do you approach what you're going to major in when you're going to college, exploring majors and things of that sort. And so same kind of concept with your community college students, right? You may want to talk about add on a layer of transferable majors, right? And so you have students that want to start with something very specific such as nursing, right, at the community colleges. And, part of that conversation may be like, that may be a good option. Here's another thing to also consider, right? And so there are definitely going to be majors that are going to be much more transferable. A program such as nursing typically is going to have, if you have any students that have pursued nursing at community colleges, it's very finite, right? You come in as a undeclared health studies major, and then you apply directly into the nursing program at your community college. So it becomes very specific. Oftentimes they're not graduating within 2 years and things of that sort. So to that piece, I say that to say that if you then want to transfer later, there are very few schools that are also gonna take in that nursing major specifically, um, because the program is so specific. So keep that in mind for your students that are entering community college and thinking about going into the health field, um, or the medical field, I should say. And so they may want to consider as an alternative something like a biology or chemistry, biochemistry, things of that sort, public health. Um, so this might be a kind of chart that you can create or tweak or really personalize depending on the students that you work with to really help them gain a sense of understanding of how to pursue majors that are a bit more transferable friendly or more transfer friendly. Anything you want to add to this one, Courtney? No? Yeah, go back? No?
You saw me like do the double dutch thing. No,
Sure.
I would just say like, we spend a lot of time, for example, like ninth and 10th grade, really doing more like college awareness and career exploration with students. And sometimes we work so hard to get them to a desired career field, but we don't do the mapping that goes along with it. And so this could be an opportunity for students to just think about what that trajectory looks like so that we're setting them up for success and ways that we can incorporate that really early on for students.
And the other thing you guys taught me way back was about like major mapping and school websites too. Like a lot of times schools will have like the classes you need to take to be like a biology major. So thinking like I'm saying this, but I'm also asking it like I start at BMCC. My goal is to do biology and then transfer into whatever Lehman for biology. I could sort of look a little bit at the classes maybe that I would have to take for the major at Lehman and use some of the other tools that you talked about to think about which ones are like course equivalents or something. Question
Yeah,
mark?
well, definitely. I mean, to Courtney's, you know, recommendation when we're talking about the timeline, right? Starting early is key. So they should be looking at those because many students might not recognize, for instance, if you were to start as an accounting student at your community college because you want to go into business later, right? And if you would have taken that step at the start of your community college experience, you'd recognize that a lot of those credits may not transfer over to your 4 year school. And that may have informed you to take a more transfer friendly major. So they definitely should look at the websites of potential schools to kind of see what the curriculums look like and how aligned are they. And then to, as you mentioned earlier, utilize tools, right? Utilize your degree works and check the what if to see how these credits will transfer over from one school to another. Use T-Rex and use these different credit tools, credit equivalency tools to get a sense of like how do my credits transfer over from one school to the next. And
Thank
those
you.
are ways that they can start early for sure. Um, to that piece, we were talking about hoping to streamline, right? I mean, credits in itself become like the most convoluting process with transfer, right? And a simple thing like knowing about articulation agreements can help students kind of really plan ahead to, to not lose time that they are spent. Students get so surprised when I used to talk to them in high school that like you can do community college, go to your 4 year school, and you can still graduate in 4 years. Because I feel like students always assume that they're gonna have to do 2 years and then 4 years, and now they gotta spend 6 years in school, and they don't necessarily want to do that. And so like you know but when we say that of like you can do your first 2 years transfer and graduate within 4 years, it requires a very specific plan. And to that piece, like utilizing articulation agreements or understanding how articulation agreements can help ensure that that promise is kept, basically, right? And lesser known, but if to the same degree, there's also joint programs. And so like you can utilize these links to kind of see the community college specific joint programs and or articulation agreements and kind of see what's available. Joint programs is basically you're getting dual admission to two sets of schools. So you're going to your community college, doing your 2 year, but upon that you're able to go to your 4 year school. Directly. Like they typically won't require you to reapply, and things of that sort. So you can see what partnerships are available and really streamline that process so it's not as difficult when it comes time to transfer.
Can I add something in here, John?
Of course, yeah.
I think these are really important to just familiarize yourselves with, um, in the sense that it becomes one of those things of when you have a student that you know will likely be community college bound, right, immediately after high school, then you can help them best choose which community colleges they're applying to that align with some of the programs that they're thinking about long term, right? So in the same way that I think as like on the access side, I'm always thinking about who do we know in certain opportunity programs. We start to have short lists of like they do better at this than this campus does. I think in the same way it would be really good to familiarize yourselves with articulation agreements, but also the joint programs for students, and then that way that can help shape your college list making in the process.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for mentioning that. And I didn't mention like where does this fit into like the work that we're doing already, right? But like we often are going to be talking to students about kind of like the different campus offices and the different resources that they have available to them, right? And so this can integrate into that conversation as like other resources that they can lean on, right? Your schools have partnerships through articulation agreements and joint programs that you can also leverage. It kind of grounds some of the things that they can plan for and expect at the next schools. In my previous role in college access, we had done basically a poster of like descriptions for posse schools. So when we would do the posse program, the students would get a snapshot basically. What does the school look like? What are popular majors? What are different things to expect in a school? Almost like when you read like one of those college books, you know. And so like the same kind of activity can translate even for community colleges as options, and like here's some articulation agreements, here's some partnerships that they work with, and places you can expect to transfer next. Cool. So hopefully these are some helpful tools. They're not the only tools, but they're, hopefully a launching pad of ways that you can bring these conversations into your conversations with students. And so another resource and opportunity would be, I'm going to pass it over to you, Courtney.
Yeah, so I think we started the call mentioning that KEF has a new program this year. It's called the Community College Bridge Program. I call it CCB. And basically our intention is to start advising students on college transfer a lot earlier than what they're currently getting it. So our experience is that students who are in their second or third year of community college don't start thinking about where they're going next, even though they have this thought in the back of their mind. They don't actually start the process until it's almost a little too late. And they start thinking about where they're going in their last semester of, of their at their community college, which it should, there's list making to be happening, there's applications to get sent out. And so Community College Bridge is an opportunity for students to have some of that programming in their first year at their community college. So our intention and our goal is to build relationships with community-based organizations. So we have CBO partners, and we're making connections on all of the CUNY community colleges to have campus partners as well. So that way we can support students through workshops, through events, panels, and some advising in that kind of way. So the reason why we wanted to bring this up is we really talk to folks starting in the spring, right? We talk to folks on the high school side starting in the spring to really identify who are those community college bound students that might be interested in a program like this. So if you remember how we started the call with that statistic, oftentimes students who are starting at community college already know that they want to pursue a bachelor's degree. So we want to know who those students are as they're matriculating to their institution. So that way once they get there, we know them, they know us, and we can fold them into some of the programming and supports that we have. That's really around just like early awareness around college transfer. Some of the things that we talk about topic wise are similar to some of the things that we shared today. The slide on majors, for example, is something that we talk to students about, and how to make sure that they're in the right major to prepare them for transfer in a year or two ahead. Also the satisfactory academic progress, because, when talking about financial aid, that is often a barrier for students persisting. And so we want to make sure that students are on top of that and they understand how their grades affect their financial aid, and also just long-term how they can transfer and what that might look like. So we're also doing a few panels and fairs of previously transferred college students, also previously have transferred experienced professionals, for example, like people like John, who are fully in their career, who have a bachelor's degree, but did start at a community college and has a story to tell about it. And so that is our intention through the program. And so we wanted to leave you all with this, knowing that you might already have students in mind that you think might be a good fit. I think if it makes sense, probably through Sandy, we might just circle back in the springtime to say, hey, like, we're ready for your students. Here's how they can connect with us, just to make sure that we make that process as seamless as possible.
That's great. That's great.
So we did want to pause. I know we have a few minutes left, but if there are any questions or comments, while John and I are still here, we'd love to answer them for you, and then we'll pass it back on to Sandy.
Did we hit the marks? Did we answer all the questions that were listed in the poll? Anything we missed? Happy to cover.
I think you hit all of those questions. As I started to say when the groups were coming back, I'm sort of thinking about things with a new lens lately. For my son who's a junior, also John has a son who's a junior, thinking about he's thinking about transfer as a junior. So any tips to a mom who's thinking about transfer, right? From my kid, he wants to go to an Ivy League school, but doesn't have the grades just yet. So he's gonna start at a CUNY. What are some of the things, even as a junior, that he could be doing to prepare? And if it's okay, I'm gonna also launch my poll as you answer the question.
That is totally okay.
Okay, thanks.
Um, and I have some thoughts. Courtney, do you want me to kick it off? Do you have some thoughts you want to share too? Okay. So, so I think some of the places to really start is just one, reiterating kind of like how SAP and how your grades are gonna play into that. I feel like when students have an understanding of like the opportunities that they can take advantage of, right? Like having good grades can help you get into something like PTK, right? Like Pi Theta Kappa. That it can open up financial aid opportunities. Like those things are sometimes helpful because it helps students kind of aim for something. Um, on the opposite end, I often have students that are like getting good grades, and then I ask them like, "What is that for?" And they don't really have an idea. They're just used to always getting good grades. So sometimes contextualizing things is helpful, right? Um, I would say, Ivy League schools. I mean, there's one right in the city, right? Columbia. Like, um, to what I was saying before, I mean, I think oftentimes students aren't visiting campuses ahead of time. And so, like, that's a campus that's right around the corner. Like, you can go visit it, do an info session, get a sense of, like, what the campus feels like, what's available there, what those resources are, and, like having a visual of what I'm aiming for, I think is sometimes helps with building out the motivation to get there. Um, and that being said, right, like they can still they can still kind of get insight into figuring out like what their preferences are for different schools and things of that sort. Like I feel like oftentimes it's easier for students to define what things they don't like than it is the things that they actually do like. So this is a great time to start honing in on some of those things so that they can get a sense of their values and really then when the time comes either affirm that Ivy League school is the best choice for me, or maybe discover some new schools that they didn't think
Right.
were gonna necessarily be good options for them, right? And so to have a better sense of the process, the second go around.
Thank
I,
you.
I would also add to, I mean, it's a little bit of a homework assignment, but I think challenging yourselves to do to think about long-term career and for every school that you're thinking about, like do some sort of mapping, right? And figuring out what that pathway might look like. I love the idea of like articulation agreements or some of those joint programs too. And like there might, depending on the major and area of interest, there might be some opportunities um, to head that way as well.
I love that. Thank you.
And doing that research, to Courtney's point, right? Like CC Top is a transfer opportunity at NYU, not the Ivy League school, but that's a thing to be aware of, right? So like you may discover like certain opportunities for some of these schools and doing that kind of research, that might be helpful, to kind of streamline that process a little bit.
That's great. Thank you. I have forgotten about that NYU program. It's a good one. All right. Any other questions? This is like a true brain trust here about transfer. Courtney and John, definitely my go-tos. So please utilize them. Well, actually, our time is up, but if you have any last minute questions, I'm sure they would stay a minute or whatever. But also please answer my poll. There's such a small group, like no reason for us not to get 100% poll answered here. Come on now. But that said, thank you so much, Courtney and John, for coming through. This was a great presentation. I'm going to be sharing this widely, and it's going to go on our archive website of CAN meetings. So, yeah, thank you. This is a great one. And you can share it widely too. I think there's a lot of good information.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us. Thanks, guys. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.